Hello, so where to begin? 15 years research. So some of you would have seen my anti-corruption videos on YouTube. This is going to be part one of a video series. Don't know how many it's going to take, but I'm going to cover my 15 years research plus the findings of research of other people over decades and longer. And what we're going to talk about is the origins of Freemasonry. And the reason we're going to talk about that, I'm an anti-police corruption campaigner, and we're going to talk about Freemasonry because there is absolutely no doubt Freemasonry has a big influence over corruption in this country. And if you do a little bit of research, you'll see stories of really nice tales. So Freemasons are a charitable organisation, and they originate from a guild of master craftsmen, stonemasons. Utter bollocks is what I'm going to say, and you have your opinions, you can post it in the comments, whatever. If you research something on the internet, Google, any of the big tech search engines, and you believe that it isn't possible to influence the results that you're going to see, then you're wrong, sorry to say. And the reason you're wrong is if you start to research specific things and dig deeper and deeper and find the real truth, and then you look for the real truth on any given subject on, say, Google, unless you type a specific term and you know exactly what it is that you're looking for and you already know the answer, you're not going to find it. And one trick that big organisations, including big tech, do is to hide any exposés on anything they don't want you to know about, is they will add stories, texts, websites, pages, all sorts of stuff, so that anything which is exposing any kind of corruption, links to Freemasonry, the establishment, all that stuff, gets further and further down the rankings. If you Google police corruption in the UK, you're going to get a load of mainstream, follow the narrative kind of stuff. You're not going to get to the real truth, the victims, the real victims, the people who've been posting on blogs because no one else will listen to them. And the reason this is important is successive governments have tried to tackle corruption, the corruption that Freemasonry brings in the police service, in the judiciary and other parts of the establishment, and they've failed, There are lots of theories from researchers who then get labelled conspiracy theorists and slandered. And there's a pattern that follows, and that pattern is you make a TikTok video, a Facebook post, you join a group and start talking about Freemasonry corruption and who they really are, and you're going to get accused of having a mental illness. It's a fact. You're going to get accused of being deluded, schizophrenic and all these things. This is one of the ploys of Freemasonry, and you're going to get asked, what's your source, where's your evidence, where's your tin hat, which is that alluding to the fact that you're a conspiracy theorist and you're wearing a tin hat so that you can't have your mind read or your mind controlled. And they're saying that this is in their armoury and it's taught by the people who control Masonic lodges. They have a specific look about them. If you've been doing this for a long time and you start to look at the profiles of people who come out with these comments when you have legitimate kind of stories about who Freemasonry are and the corruption they're involved in, and you look at the faces, there's a distinctness about them, as if they're almost related, the same genetic pool of people. And if you speak to victims of organised corruption in the establishment, is what I'm going to call it, and that encompasses a lot of different people, they'll tell you a very similar story, and that story will include them saying that they contacted the media about the corruption, the harassment, they're being electronically harassed, and they're having their emails read, and when they go somewhere, people are standing in a queue behind them reading the contents of their email very quietly, so no one else can hear except the person who's the victim. And what they're trying to do is make you look mentally disturbed, because when you go and tell somebody that, you're going to fit the profile of someone who's paranoid to the point that you're mentally ill. And that's what they do to people. It's a fact. When I first started to research police corruption and the techniques they use, it's not just the police, security services, i.e. special branch, which is an arm of the police, but you never know who they are because they're always plain clothes, or even spies. When you start to research the techniques and what they're doing to people, and you suspect that you are being stalked and harassed, you speak to people who have a lot of experience in this field. So I was in my mid-30s when I started to research, because I was a victim myself of stalking and harassment, organised, and I wanted to know who's responsible, you know. I'm not going to take it lying down. And I spoke to a man, Tony Gosling, a freelance radio journalist from the Bristol area, and he was telling me some of the techniques that they use. I'd witnessed some of this, and then I spoke to another man. I'm not going to tell you his name, but I'm going to tell you who he was. So he told me that MI5 will follow you, and he named them as MI5, and they will move your car from one place in the car park to another. They'll take stuff out of your car, they'll tamper with the controls of your car and all this stuff. So when you start to tell people that, you're going to discredit yourself, because they're not going to believe you. So this was back in 2009, 2010. A lot's changed since then, an awful lot. You know, we've had a change of government, and we've had a change of the outlook on corruption. All of this does link back to Freemasonry. I'm going somewhere with this, and we will talk about the origins and what's going on in our country. But let's talk about, first of all, the head of MI5. In 2021, he announced that vast numbers of British people are being harassed by foreign spies, and the outcome is they could lose financially, have their savings stolen, their assets stolen, they could lose their property, i.e. the house, their car, and everything else. They could even lose their livelihood, their job. And the consequences of this stalking by what he called foreign spies, he named China, goes up to and including death. So they're not happy with taking your money, taking your house. The ultimate outcome is they want you dead. Now, this does link to the ideology behind Freemasonry, not what you see, the Masonic Hall and the building and the people who you see walking there, nice, pleasant business people with their ties on, senior police officers, you know, senior counsellors, people who you will automatically assume are respectable people. We're talking about the inner workings, the control that it has. So any organisation that has a group of people that sit around together and they conduct their activity in secrecy doesn't necessarily have any power. They can't do much except talk about, you know, okay, say for example, I'm in one of those secret groups and I have a couple of other people, and I'm a senior manager in a large company. I have an opening and I'm going to interview 20 people, maybe 10, and then come to a decision and give it to the best person. It's quite a lucrative job, it's going to pay well, company car, and, you know, nice pension. Whoever takes that job, they're going to be set up for the next 20 years. In my secret society, there's another man, and he says, do you know what, my brother-in-law, he could do that. Can you give it to him? And this is that's the power you're going to have. Doesn't mean that you can control the outcome of major events. Who's a counsellor? Who's going to be the next commander in a local police station? You know, you don't have that power. If you're in a secret society which has an influence over the police service, all of a sudden you have a lot of power. Now, there are people who have been victims of, or they say they've been victims, and I've heard legitimate kind of very, very credible stories from people who've been victims of police stalking, harassment, state corruption and all those kind of things. And a lot of them mention Freemasonry. They've done their own research, they've met other victims of corruption, and vast numbers of people come to the same conclusion. It's Freemasonry doing this. And these are, and I don't want to get into any racial discussion about the rights and wrongs of what I'm saying now. But I'm not racist, but let me tell you, the profile of the people who are victims is generally white British people who their ancestry dates back quite a while. They're white, they're like me, pale skinned, blue eyes, and they fit that profile. The head of MI5 just said British people are being targeted. I'm going to go further and say ethnic British people are being targeted. And he said that the main culprit is China. And he said that it's that severe that gone is the biggest risk to people in mainland UK being terrorism. The risk of being targeted by foreign spies is as big a risk as terrorism, and we should all be talking about it on a daily basis. And you have to wonder how these foreign spies have such big influence and can get away with it without getting caught. So MI5 know what's going on because they have a vast budget funded by the government. As I say, there have been a lot of changes since 2010 when the government changed. We had a socialist, and I'm going to say / communist government. The people of MI5 blame for the victimisation of ethnic British people is a communist superstate, China. They have enough people to do that. Now, I wrote in 2019, I think, there are suspicions that the Chinese secret police operate in central London, and this may seem far-fetched to lots of people, and they have a network of people who they control, Chinese people. Lo and behold, in I think it was 2022, the Metropolitan Police were forced to admit they'd found Chinese secret police operating police stations in London. Fact. Now, how did I know this? So I lived in London for 4 years, and I'd seen these lone men, aged between 40 and 60, roaming around London, all dressed in a very similar way, discreet, nondescript, and didn't have a purpose. You see people walking down the street, they have a purpose, they're going somewhere, and they're focused on their purpose. They might be thinking about different things on the way. When people are walking down the street, wandering around, they don't have a purpose. And I've seen this kind of behaviour from British police spies, and it was pretty obvious they were part of the same group. They interacted with only Chinese people, and the Chinese people looked as if they were subordinate to these spies. As it happened, I was correct. Now, the Met Police then said we didn't see any negative activity from Chinese Secret Service, for want of a better thing, operating in London. If they're operating in London, they're operating in Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool and all these different places. What MI5 didn't say is if China is, and they said they are, harassing, victimising, stalking tens of thousands of British people out of their savings, their property, their job, and ultimately killing them off, how is this happening? And you yourself can start to link this together. We've got Chinese communist spies have organisational units based in major cities in the UK, and British people are dying from what MI5 say are being tens of thousands of people being targeted by communist spies. I'm going to go further than that today, and I'm going to be as right as I was in 2019 when I said China is operating spies in central London, the secret police. So Oriental secret societies control Freemasonry. That's a broad, wide statement. There's anecdotal evidence, and this does go some way to explaining the racial hatred against ethnic white British people. All of the people who I spoke to were victims of police and state corruption in the childcare service, in social services, by the police, over the last 15 years, fit that demographic. We are being targeted because of our race and who we are. Now, as I said, it's a broad statement. Oriental secret societies. And by Oriental, what I mean is from the Far East, the Orient. You may not have heard that term before. You may. Orient, an old name for Southeast Asia. So we're talking the very Far East, Japan, and then backwards from Japan to maybe Thailand and a little bit further backwards from there. So it encompasses China, which is a very big place. So what they got over? They got a fifth of the world's population, or close to a fifth of the people in the world come from China, and all of the little countries in between. So we're talking Philippines, Indonesia, Indochina area, and Japan, the land where the sun rises, the land of the rising sun. So as far east as you could go. That was the end of the world, not so long ago. So we are, as a species, part of an evolutionary tree that goes back a very long time, and our recent history is documented recent history is less than 500 years old. So 600 years ago there wasn't an understanding of what was past the Azores going west, the Americas. There's documented evidence that the discovery of the Americas happened before Columbus, but we're not going to go that far. It's in our known history, 500 years or so, maybe a little bit more if you go back to some of the religious texts and royal documentation that we have in the National Library and some places in Italy and the Vatican, places like that. But that's generally where we are. So as far east as we could go would be Japan, the end of the world. As far west we would go, we were talking about Europe, would be Ireland. The two ends of the world, Ireland and Japan. We've got a few islands in the Atlantic, but generally speaking, that was our known world, which after the Americas was described as the old world. There's a place in that which is, or has been, known as Khazaria, and that encompasses what is now the Ukraine and a wider area around that. Let's have a look at a map. Now, this is relevant, and I'll explain why in a minute. So let's have a look at a few pictures of a Masonic lodge. Anything interesting there? So we can see what we know as the Star of David on the front of those Masonic lodges. Star of David isn't an ancient thing, it's relatively new, it's linked with Zionism. Zionism is partly the belief of that the state of Israel has a right to exist, but it predates 1948 by a very, very long way. And there's some interesting things about the new occupants of that area that some people say is Palestine and some people say is Israel. And first of all, I'm not an anti-Semite. So a Semite is a person who is believed to be descended from people chosen by God, And there are a lot of historic researchers tying together how that belief came about, and there are different theories, and you have to do your own research, and you have to look at, there is a period in time called the Younger Dryas, and that involved catastrophic destruction across the world, and the world was rebuilt around 9,000 years ago, between 9 and 10,000 years ago. And that isn't the first time it happened. And these people turned up in different places around the world with the knowledge of how to rebuild. And this is also relevant because we're talking about an ancient people who are said to be descended by gods, and the people who came with the instructions on how to rebuild civilizations were known as gods, the living gods, literally, by the ancients. So it's said that Semites are descendants of God, and kings and queens ruled by divine power. And if you look, these aren't my opinions. These are research by credible historians. So what I'm saying is, I'm not making this stuff up. I'm an academic researcher myself in different fields, and I've used my ability and my training in how to academically research to come to some of the conclusions that I'm going to present. Now, let's go back to Freemasonry. So we've got Khazaria, which is the area that we spoke about. We have a force which is acted against ethnic British people in the UK. Now, MI5 said it's China. I'm going to say it's communism. China is a communist superstate. If you speak to Chinese people, they're generally, pretty affable people, pleasant, keep themselves to themselves. And the force that's driving this hatred is communism. We had, for a long time, in recent history, a Cold War where no shots were fired, but the Western countries, Germany, France, that kind of dividing line between East Germany, West Germany, the United Kingdom, America, the English-speaking world, had a standoff against the communist world. And Eastern European, Soviet, Russian communism was seen as the arch enemy to Western society. And that communism is actually, China's part of that bloc, the communist bloc, not part of what was the USSR, the Soviet Union, but part of the communist superpowers that presented that deadly threat to Western society for so long. And now we find that the war has gone, the Cold War has gone, and MI5 is saying British people are dying because of communism. Now, if we talk about the basis of communism beyond total control of people's lives and the belief that you can live in a commune without any money and everybody will work to make their contribution to a society, that is a fundamental basis of communism, but it's a bit deeper than that. So if we look back historical documents over the last 1,000 years and a bit more, there's reference to a slave caste. Caste is another name for race. So a slave people are an entire ethnic group of people who were bred to be slaves. And there's a reference to a slave army, where an army of people who were held as slaves were an army and were used to invade territories. This is all relevant, and we're all going somewhere with this, and it's all linked to an understanding of the risk to British people, the Chinese spies, Freemasonry, police corruption. All those things are linked together. Now, so what have we got? We've got Khazaria, we've got Japan, the end of the world, the land where the sun rises. We've got the Cold War, communism. Now, there's another thing about communism, and this is going to start to make things fit together for you. They do not believe in royal blood. In fact, communists in the Russian Revolution murdered the Russian bloodlines, the Russian royal bloodlines, the royal family. They murdered all the Tsars, killed them all off. And if you do research and look at them, they have a distinct appearance about them. And they were murdered by the communists who essentially founded the USSR and then committed wholesale genocide, murdering over 50 million people. This gets forgotten about. This is far bigger than any other genocide in human history. And it was brought about by the communists who established the Soviet Union, which was Russia and the Eastern European bloc of countries. So we move a bit further along the road. So we know about communism, we know about their hatred for royal bloodlines. We know about the ancient slave army, the ancient slave caste. Now have a look at communist propaganda. Here's some. Now this is relevant, and I'll explain why in a minute. So let's have a look at a few pictures of a Masonic lodge. The workers, who they are. Yeah? So here's some from the 1920s, 1930s and so on. And communism built on philosophies of said of everybody has a part in society, there's no money and you will work and contribute. It's a bit deeper than that, because essentially you're a slave to the system. Communism believes that everybody should be a slave to the system. That's what it is, that's what it's about. There's an elite at the top and you're a slave to the system. There's no royals, there's no royal blood, everybody's equal. Now, by killing off the royal bloodlines and saying everybody is now equal, what they're really kind of doing is opening themselves up to a theory that actually their belief was that everybody wasn't equal, and the unequal people, they had to kill them all off. They were different genetically. And this goes back to an ancient slave race. So there are theories, and these are just theories, but there are genetics to it, of ancient slaves being bred to work mines. And the Chinese race, the Han Chinese, is less than 6,000 years old. This is a fact, so I've got to be careful, because these people responsible are in our police service, our establishment, our judiciary. They will accuse me of racial hatred and come knocking at my door to drag me away. This does happen in the UK. We have warnings from MI5. Now, the Han race is 6,000 years old. China spent the last, in recent times, 100 years or so, probably a lot more, telling everybody in China, in schools, they're part of a different branch of humanity, a special race of people. Genetics, DNA profiling has proven that to be wrong. They essentially evolved from the same base humans as you and I, but they have a distinctive look. That distinctive look is, and the Chinese government have acknowledged this. This isn't me trying to take the piss out of anybody, this is fact. And people will try and talk me down and say I've got a mental illness for saying this. And it will be people linked to those communists, Masonic lodges, and the hatred they have for British people. Now, the Chinese government have acknowledged that they have genetic conditions in the gene pool of Han Chinese people, and they say through close breeding. Now, that they need fresh blood in their gene pool. They have a specific chromosome trait, Han Chinese people do, which they have a couple, but one of them is linked to Down syndrome. It's an unfortunate fact, but it is a fact, and that happened one way or another. A whole race of people was bred with Down syndrome in their gene pool. How did that happen? Who did that? Who's the nearest neighbours? Who would have hated people so much? Now, if we go back 6,000 years, archaeologists have found white mummified bodies in China, which indicates that that area of the world was populated by white people with blonde and ginger hair. And something happened in that 6,000 years. All those white people have gone completely. There's a race of people now that we don't know their true genetic origin, but what we do know is that they have inbred genetic illnesses. And there are others. So all autistic indicators, Chinese government have acknowledged there are issues, or there are problems with the gene pool of the Han Chinese race. And autistic, there's still a couple of autistic indicators that are pretty well known. One of those is multiple hair crowns. Multiple hair crowns, like here, 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 and hair for men. I've got male pattern baldness, should I say? And it's been with me for quite a while, unfortunately. And one of the indicators of autism is a lack of male pattern baldness. And if anybody suffers autism, you have my sympathy. I have illnesses. I don't have any genetic illnesses such as that. I have Crohn's disease, and to suffer from any illness isn't pleasant. But let's not hide away from this stuff, and let's not be beaten over the head with political correctness to hide what's going on in Masonic lodges. And this is linked, and we will get there. And it's going to take 1 or 2 videos. So we've come up to half an hour now, and I don't want to have people switching off after 40 minutes, 15 minutes, not having time to come back. So we're going to call it a day, and we're going to pick up from this in another video in a couple of weeks' time.